Animation for kids is supposed to be colorful, safe, and fun, right? Well, not always. Over the years, American studios have pushed out films that were anything but ordinary. Movies that looked like family entertainment on the surface, but left kids squirming with confusion, fear, or just plain, what did I just watch energy. Have you ever stumbled across a childhood film so strange you questioned if it was real or just a fever dream? Let's dive into 13 of the most bizarre animated films ever marketed toward kids. And trust us, they're unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Twice Upon a Time, 1983. Imagine taking bedtime stories, smashing them together with avant-garde art, and sprinkling in nightmare fuel. That's Twice Upon a Time, a 1983 fantasy co-produced by none other than George Lucas. At first glance, it looked like a quirky family tale about two bumbling heroes trying to save the world of dreams from an evil villain named Synonymous Botch. But the execution? Pure surreal chaos. The film used a technique called lumage animation, layering cutout figures in front of glowing backdrops. The result looked like a psychedelic scrapbook come to life. The villains weren't gentle Disney-style bad guys either. Botch unleashes creatures called nightmares on the world, literal, grotesque monsters with distorted bodies that could easily haunt a child's dreams. The story kept lurching from whimsical slapstick to eerie horror without warning, leaving young viewers completely unmoored. Adding to the confusion, the film's dialogue was crammed with bizarre wordplay and oddball humor clearly aimed more at adults than kids. What really sealed its strange reputation was the production chaos. Different versions of the movie circulated, one of which included language not exactly appropriate for children. Many TV stations ended up airing the wrong cut, baffling parents who thought they were showing their kids a safe cartoon. Today, Twice Upon a Time has a cult following for its daring visuals and offbeat humor, but marketed to kids in 1983, it was a fever dream wrapped in construction paper. Rover Dangerfield, 1991. If you thought Disney dogs were strange, try this. A wisecracking, gambling Las Vegas dog, voiced by Rodney Dangerfield himself. Yes, Rover Dangerfield was a real animated movie aimed at kids, and it might be one of the weirdest mismatches of tone in cartoon history. The idea sounds wholesome at first. A street-smart city dog who ends up on a farm, learns about loyalty, and finds a new home. But once you hear Dangerfield's signature rasp, joking about mobsters and life in Vegas, you realize this is no ordinary children's flick. The script is stuffed with one-liners that sound ripped from a stand-up routine. Imagine being 8 years old and trying to follow jokes about casinos and shady characters. Even stranger, the film opens with Rover's owner tied up with gangsters and our dog hero, narrowly, escaping being tossed into a river. Does that sound like material designed for Saturday morning cartoon audiences? Exactly. But here's the kicker. Between the oddball crime subplots and Dangerfield's adult persona squeezed into a floppy-eared pup, the movie tries to force-feed kids a standard farm life teaches true values message. The tonal whiplash is staggering. One moment you're hearing Rodney crack wise about city life. The next, you're watching him fall in love with a sweet farm dog. In the end, Rover Dangerfield was marketed like a family comedy, but landed as a bizarre experiment that couldn't decide if it was Looney Tunes or late-night stand-up. For kids, it was just confusing. For adults, it was Rodney being Rodney in animated form. Little Nemo, Adventures in Slumberland, 1989. This film looked like an innocent fantasy adventure, after all. It was based on the beloved Winsor McCay comic strip. But Little Nemo. Adventures in Slumberland turned out to be one of the strangest animated experiences kids ever sat through. A joint American-Japanese production. It was plagued by years of development problems, and the end result feels like a dream sequence that can't decide if it's magical or terrifying. The story follows young Nemo, who travels to a magical kingdom full of whimsical characters, including a royal princess and a mischievous boy named Flip. But lurking beneath the bright colors is a villain called the Nightmare King, a shadowy figure who spreads darkness across the land. The imagery of his army, oozing black tentacles that consume everything, was straight-up nightmare fuel for kids who expected a light fairy tale. What makes the film even weirder is its tonal imbalance. One scene might show Nemo joyfully soaring through candy-colored skies, while the next throws him into a claustrophobic battle against surreal monsters. Critics noted that the movie veered from charming musical numbers to unsettling darkness without warning, leaving children both enchanted and disturbed. Despite its oddities, Little Nemo became a cult classic. Many who saw it as kids remember being both fascinated and horrified in equal measure. It's one of those films that, once you revisit as an adult, makes you say, "No wonder I had strange dreams after watching this." Cool World, 1992. Picture this. A movie trailer that looked like a kid-friendly version of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But when audiences walked into Cool World, they got something far weirder. Directed by Ralph Bakshi, already known for edgy, surreal animation, the film was a chaotic hybrid of live action and cartoon, marketed with a misleading PG-13 veneer that tricked plenty of families into thinking it was safe for younger viewers. The story centers on a cartoonist, played by Gabriel Byrne, who gets sucked into an alternate universe where doodles live alongside humans. Sounds fun, right? Except the tone is grimy, chaotic, and filled with strange rules about crossing between worlds. The main cartoon character, Hollywood, is drawn like a femme fatale from a noir comic, and her surreal, exaggerated world felt more unsettling than playful. For kids expecting wacky fun, the film was incomprehensible. The cartoon visuals veered from rubbery slapstick to grotesque exaggeration, often clashing with the brooding live-action sequences. Even the studio seemed unsure how to market it. Trailers leaned on zany cartoon antics, while the movie itself spiraled into surreal adult themes kids couldn't possibly understand. Cool World has since been remembered as one of Bakshi's strangest experiments, and while it has its defenders for pushing boundaries, it stands as a prime example of how misleading marketing can leave families scratching their heads. Kids walked in expecting Bugs Bunny. What they got was a neon fever dream that belonged nowhere near Saturday morning TV. The Magic Voyage, 1992. What happens when you try to retell the story of Christopher Columbus but replace history with singing animals, a sentient ship, and psychedelic visuals? You get The Magic Voyage, one of the most baffling animated films ever marketed to children. This German-American co-production was heavily promoted as a family adventure, but the end result looked more like a kaleidoscope of half-baked ideas. Instead of presenting Columbus as a serious explorer, the film transforms him into a bumbling dreamer, guided not by skill, but by a talking woodworm named Pico. Yes, his grand voyage across the ocean is driven by a tiny insect whispering in his ear. Along the way, viewers are treated to bizarre visuals, from glowing galaxies to psychedelic sea monsters, that feel ripped straight from a surreal art project rather than a history-based kids' film. The tonal dissonance is staggering. One moment, Columbus and Pico are singing cheerful duets about discovery. The next, they're facing an evil smoke demon intent on world domination. For kids, the movie was less educational history and more, what on earth am I watching? To make matters stranger, the film's American dub featured recognizable voices like Dom DeLuise, but even seasoned performers couldn't smooth over the odd pacing, uneven animation, and surreal storytelling. Marketed as lighthearted fun, The Magic Voyage ended up as a bizarre, confusing mess that still lingers in the memories of kids who stumbled across it. Rock-a-Doodle, 1991. If Elvis Presley ever turned into a rooster, you'd get Don Bluth's Rock-a-Doodle, a movie so strange it left an entire generation scratching their heads. Bluth, known for darker, emotionally rich animated hits like The Land Before Time and An American Tail, suddenly unleashed a musical about Chanticleer, a rooster who believes his crow makes the sun rise. When he leaves the farm for the city, chaos erupts, and a bizarre blend of live action and animation kicks in. The film begins with live actors, including a little boy who's magically transformed into an animated kitten, and that alone is nightmare fuel. From there, the story lurches between farmyard animals, neon-lit nightclubs, and surreal musical numbers that feel like they belong in two completely different movies. The villain? an owl voiced by Christopher Plummer, who sings and terrorizes the farm in sequences that are genuinely terrifying for kids. What made Rock-a-Doodle so bizarre wasn't just its odd premise, but its whiplash execution. The Elvis-inspired rooster belts out rock ballads one minute, and the next, you're watching a gloomy battle against sinister forces of darkness. Parents expected a charming farm musical. What they got was a kaleidoscope of tonal shifts, creepy imagery, and oddly mature themes about identity and fame. Though the movie flopped, it has since gained cult status as one of Bluth's strangest gambles. For kids, though, the memory stuck. A movie where the rooster's crow controlled the sun, and nightmares lurked in every shadow. Not exactly Mary Poppins. The Phantom Tollbooth, 1970. Imagine Warner Brothers making a kids' film that feels more like a trippy lecture in philosophy than a Saturday matinee. That's The Phantom Tollbooth, directed by legendary animator Chuck Jones. Based on Norton Juster's novel, it tells the story of Milo, a bored boy who drives his toy car through a magic toll booth and finds himself in a world of abstract concepts turned into literal characters. Sounds whimsical, right? Until you realize the film is crawling with bizarre imagery that confused and terrified kids in equal measure. There's a spelling bee that stings with words, a giant watchdog with a literal clock in its chest, and demons with names like the census taker and the demon of insincerity. The design of these creatures, grotesque, exaggerated, and looming, was hardly the stuff of comforting family fun. The film's pacing didn't help. It swings between long stretches of dialogue-heavy allegory and sudden bursts of surreal action. For children expecting Bugs Bunny-level comedy, this was Warner Brothers, after all. The experience was like being dropped into a dream where every math problem and vocabulary lesson came to life in monstrous form. Though critics appreciated its ambition, kids often left bewildered, wondering if they had just sat through a class disguised as a movie. Today, The Phantom Tollbooth is praised for its daring attempt to visualize abstract thought, but for children in 1970, it was a head-spinning mix of wonder and unease. Happily Ever After 1990. Snow White's story ends with happily ever after. Or so you thought. Enter Happily Ever After, a strange quasi-sequel that picked up where Disney's classic left off, but without Disney's involvement. Produced by Filmation, it dropped audiences into a twisted continuation where Snow White must battle the evil witch's brother, Lord Malice. Yes, apparently villains run in the family. The weirdness didn't stop there. Instead of dwarfs, the film introduced the Dwarfels, a group of magical female characters, each with peculiar powers, from controlling weather to talking to animals. On paper, it sounded empowering and fun. On screen, the mix of oddball designs and awkward story beats left kids puzzled. Add in Lord Malice transforming into a dragon and sequences drenched in dark imagery, and you have a so-called children's film that leaned closer to nightmare territory. The animation itself didn't help. Choppy movements, strange color choices, and surreal transitions gave the movie a dreamlike, but not in a comforting way, feel. And while it was marketed as a family-friendly alternative to Disney, its darker tone and bizarre new characters made it feel like an off-brand fairy tale from another dimension. Happily Ever After has since been remembered as one of the strangest unauthorized sequels ever attempted. It was supposed to cash in on nostalgia, but ended up confusing kids and angering parents who expected Disney-level magic. Instead, they got a knockoff fairy tale with a dragon brother and a cast of characters that felt like they wandered in from a Saturday morning cartoon. Heidi's Song, 1982. When Hanna-Barbera, the studio behind the Flintstones and Scooby-Doo, decided to adapt Heidi into an animated musical, you'd expect wholesome mountain adventures and charming songs. What audiences got instead was Heidi's Song, a film that careened into bizarre and terrifying territory halfway through. The first act plays it safe, Heidi living with her grandfather, making friends, and singing upbeat tunes. But then, out of nowhere, the movie plunges into gothic horror. Heidi is kidnapped, locked in a mansion, and suddenly we're dealing with witches, evil shadows, and skeleton-like villains. The visuals are drenched in eerie lighting and unsettling imagery that feels more like a haunted house attraction than a children's musical. What made it even stranger was the tonal shift. Kids who thought they were in for a simple, heartwarming story suddenly found themselves staring at scenes of writhing shadows, cruel antagonists, and frightening dream sequences. Hanna-Barbera's typically bright Saturday morning style was twisted into something darker, making it one of the studio's most unsettling experiments. The film never found the same success as Hanna-Barbera's TV shows, and it's not hard to see why. Parents looking for safe family entertainment were shocked by how disturbing the second half became. Today, Heidi's song is remembered less as a charming adaptation and more as a bizarre detour into nightmare imagery, proving even the most innocent stories can get derailed into strangeness. The Pagemaster, 1994. On the surface, The Pagemaster seemed like the perfect family adventure. Macaulay Culkin, fresh off Home Alone, gets trapped inside a magical library where books come to life. Sounds safe enough, right? But once kids were seated, they realized this movie was much darker and stranger than advertised. The story has Culkin's character, Richard, sucked into an animated world where he meets 3 living books: adventure, fantasy, and horror, voiced by big stars like Patrick Stewart and Whoopi Goldberg. While the idea was meant to spark a love for reading, the execution leaned heavily into frightening visuals. Skeleton pirates, monstrous dragons, stormy seas, and grotesque villains dominated the screen, often with imagery that felt closer to gothic horror than family fun. Even the horror book character was a literal green, slimy volume with a creepy cackle, guiding Richard through sequences that unsettled plenty of young viewers. The atmosphere of dread clashed with the cheerful educational message, making it one of the most confusingly marketed films of the 1990s. Critics noted that the film seemed to scare more kids than it inspired, and its box office failure reflected that mismatch. But for children who grew up with it, The Pagemaster remains burned into memory as one of those "was that really meant for us?" experiences. A movie about reading turned into a gothic thrill ride with only occasional moments of lighthearted fun. Felix the Cat, the movie, 1991. Felix the Cat had been around since the silent film era, a lovable trickster whose magic bag of tricks entertained generations. But when Felix the Cat, the movie arrived in 1991, kids expecting light slapstick were blindsided by a full-on fever dream. The film throws Felix into a dystopian alternate dimension ruled by an evil princess and her power-hungry uncle. What follows is less a coherent story and more a patchwork of psychedelic set pieces. The animation is jagged, the pacing erratic, and the dialogue nonsensical. Felix wanders through barren wastelands, fights bizarre robotic creatures, and faces surreal villains who look more like nightmare sketches than Saturday morning cartoons. Children who adored the charming shorts of the past suddenly found themselves staring at a bleak sci-fi world where logic had clearly taken a vacation. To make matters stranger, the movie was marketed heavily toward kids with colorful posters and promises of classic Felix fun. What they got instead was a grim adventure packed with confusing plot lines, unsettling visuals, and an atmosphere that felt closer to an experimental art project than a family film. Parents who sat through it were equally baffled, wondering how a character once famous for simple gags got dropped into something so bizarre. In hindsight, Felix the Cat, the movie is remembered as one of the strangest attempts to revive a classic character. Kids who saw it still talk about it like a half-remembered dream, asking, "Did that actually happen, or did I imagine it?" Unfortunately for Felix, the movie really did happen, and it marked the beginning of the end for his mainstream popularity. A Troll in Central Park, 1994. Don Bluth makes our list again, this time with A Troll in Central Park, a film so sweet and strange, it feels like it was made on another planet. The story follows Stanley, a kind-hearted troll banished from his homeland because he has a green thumb that makes flowers bloom. He winds up in New York's Central Park, where he befriends 2 children and battles the evil queen, Gnorga, who despises happiness and plants. On paper, this sounds like a gentle family tale. In execution, it became an oddly saccharine, disjointed mess. Stanley himself is designed like a soft, plush toy with a squeaky voice, but his world is filled with surreal imagery, including menacing rock trolls and bizarre transformations that border on creepy. Queen Norga is especially unsettling, with her grotesque design and strange magical powers that make the tone swing wildly between goofy and disturbing. Audiences didn't know what to make of it. Marketed as another Don Bluth masterpiece, it ended up as a confusing tonal soup, too childish for older kids, too eerie for younger ones. The songs were sugary, the visuals surreal, and the story so flimsy it felt like a dream that evaporates when you wake up. The movie bombed spectacularly at the box office, becoming one of Bluth's most notorious failures. But, for the unlucky kids who saw it, A Troll in Central Park lingers in memory as a baffling film that seemed designed to confuse rather than entertain. It's proof that even great directors can wander too far into the bizarre. Raggedy Ann and Andy, a musical adventure, 1977. Raggedy Ann and Andy were iconic American dolls, beloved for their wholesome charm. So, when a feature-length musical was announced in 1977, parents thought they were in for a safe, cuddly kids' film. Instead, Raggedy Ann and Andy, a musical adventure, delivered one of the strangest, most unsettling animated experiences ever marketed to children. The animation, handled by top talent like Richard Williams, who later worked on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, is fluid and imaginative, but also wildly distorted. Characters stretch, twist, and melt in ways that feel less like children's entertainment and more like a fever dream. The story sends Raggedy Ann and Andy on a quest through surreal landscapes populated by grotesque villains, including a giant gooey monster named Greedy, who swallows everything in sight. The songs, meanwhile, swing between whimsical and downright unsettling, with lyrics that sound more like cryptic riddles than catchy tunes. Kids who watched it often walked away disturbed rather than delighted, remembering sequences that felt more nightmarish than magical. What makes it truly bizarre is the disconnect. Marketed as a soft, doll-based musical for kids, it turned into a surreal odyssey through distorted dreamscapes. Parents expecting something cozy got an accidental art film that pushed boundaries of what animation could look like. Today, Raggedy Ann and Andy, a musical adventure, is recognized as a cult classic for animation enthusiasts. But for the kids it was originally sold to, it was a confusing, creepy ride they never asked for. So, there you have it, 13 animated films that prove just because something is marketed to kids doesn't mean it's kid-friendly. From psychedelic dreamscapes to talking trolls and fever dream musicals, these movies left young viewers confused, frightened, and sometimes fascinated. Which of these bizarre films do you remember from your childhood? Drop your memories in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you love strange cinema deep dives, and let's see who else survived these weird trips disguised as kids' movies. Because sometimes, the scariest adventures come with a G rating.